I recently faced something nobody should ever have to say out loud. The HOA president called 911 on my wife without realizing she's the new police chief. Her excuse? A bogus emergency inspection she invented on the spot. Funny thing is, the only thing inspected that day was Karen's career options, right before the cuffs clicked. Let me start from the beginning. The banging on the front door was loud enough to wake the dead, or at least wake me from a pretty good Saturday morning dream. I think it involved a giant donut that tasted like bacon. I shuffled to the door, still half asleep, and peeked through the little window. My eyes popped open all the way. It was Karen. Karen, the queen of our little neighborhood, the president of the homeowners association, and the reason my left eye started twitching sometimes. She was about 35, with a haircut so sharp you could probably slice cheese with it, and a face that looked like she gargled with vinegar every morning. Today, her face was extra sour, like she'd added lemon juice to the mix. She was jiggling the doorknob like a raccoon trying to get into a trash can. "Open up, Mark," she yelled, her voice like nails on a chalkboard, if the chalkboard was also screaming. "Emergency inspection. Right now." Emergency inspection? What emergency? Did my prize-winning petunia suddenly turn into a man-eating plant? I doubted it. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it, and those fingerprints usually meant trouble for someone. Usually me. Before I could even think of a good sarcastic reply, my wife, Sarah, appeared beside me. She'd just gotten back from her morning run, still in her bright pink running shoes and sweat-wicking gear. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had that focused look she gets, the one that says, "Don't mess with me. I just ran 5 miles and I haven't had coffee yet." What Karen didn't know, because Sarah had only started her new job last week and it wasn't common knowledge in the cul-de-sac yet, was that my wife was now Police Chief Sarah Miller. Yes, the police chief of our whole town. She was tough, fair, and did not suffer fools gladly. And Karen was the queen of fools. Sarah opened the door, not wide, just enough to block the entrance with her body. She stood there, calm as a cucumber, while Karen practically vibrated with impatience on our porch. "Good morning, Karen," Sarah said, her voice even. "Is there a problem?" Karen puffed up like an angry toad. "Problem? Yes, there's a problem. I'm here for an emergency inspection of this property. As HOA president, I have the right." She waved a piece of paper in the air, probably some HOA bylaw she'd twisted to her liking. Our house was fine. We kept it neat. This was pure harassment, Karen style. She loved throwing her weight around making rules and then making up new rules if the old ones didn't let her boss people enough. An emergency inspection for what, exactly? Sarah asked, still polite, but with a steel edge in her voice that I knew well. It was the voice that made hardened criminals spill their guts. Karen, however, was not that smart. "That's none of your business, renter," Karen snapped. Oh, that was rich. We owned our house. Karen just liked to call anyone she didn't like a renter or temporary resident. It was part of her power trip. "Now, are you going to let me in, or am I going to have to enforce the bylaws?" Enforce how? With her pointy little finger? Then Karen did something incredibly stupid. She tried to push past Sarah. She literally put her hand on Sarah's shoulder and shoved. It wasn't a hard shove, more like a rude, entitled nudge from someone who expected everyone to just melt out of her way. Sarah didn't budge an inch. Instead, with a smooth, practiced move, probably something she learned in police academy self-defense class, she shifted her weight, and her hip connected with Karen's side. It wasn't a violent hit, more like a perfectly executed check. Karen, who was off balance from her own push, went stumbling backward. She yelped, arms flailing like a cartoon character, and landed right on her backside in my prize-winning petunias next to the steps, the ones I was just dreaming about. Ironically, for a second, there was silence. Just Karen sitting in the dirt, looking stunned. Her sharp haircut was now decorated with a bit of mulch and a crushed petunia petal. Then her face went from surprise to furious in about half a second. It turned a shade of red I'd only ever seen on very ripe tomatoes. "Assault!" she shrieked, scrambling to her feet, dirt smearing her fancy pants. You assaulted me. And you're impersonating something official. She sputtered, pointing a shaky, dirt-covered finger at Sarah. She fumbled for her phone, her eyes wild. I'm calling 911. You're both going to jail. My heart hammered. This was bad. This was really bad. Karen dialing 911, accusing my wife, the actual police chief, of assault and impersonation? The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast, but I wasn't laughing. What on earth was going to happen when the cops she called rolled up to our house? I recently faced something nobody moved into this neighborhood ever have to say Whispering out loud. Pines about a year ago. The HOA president called so 911 on my wife something out of realizing she's the new police TV show. Green lawns, friendly waves from neighbors, emergency inspections. She invented. We wanted quiet. I worked from home as a writer. The only thing inspected that day was Karen's career options and butter. Right before Sarah had just landed the police chief job in Elmwood, our town. The banging on the front door was loud enough to wake the dead, in the city, or it was at least wake me from a pretty good Saturday morning dream. Really make a difference. I think it involved a giant donut that tasted like bacon. We decided to keep her new role a bit on the down low for the first few weeks, still half asleep, just among close friends and colleagues while she settled in. My eyes popped open all the way. We figured there was no need to make a big announcement. The queen of our little neighborhood, the president of the homeowners association. How wrong we were! And the reason my left eye started twitching known who she was messing with. She was about 35. Our first hint that Whispering Pines so sharp might have probably sliced cheese with it. Of course, face that looked like she gargled shortly after we moved in. Every morning, we got a very official-looking letter. Her face was typed in a font that screamed like she'd added lemon juice about our garden gnome. She was jiggling the doorknob Bartholomew like a raccoon trying to get into a trash can. Who wore a little fishing vest and held a tiny rod. She yelled. Was not in voice like nails on a chalkboard. Community standards. If the chalkboard was also screaming, according to Karen, emergency inspection. We had to move Bartholomew to emergency inspection. Hidden from her judgmental gaze. Did my then there was the incident with the trash turn into a man-eating We'd left them out an hour or too long after pickup. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it, and those fingerprints usually meant trouble for someone. Apparently taken by Karen herself. Before I could even think of a good sarcastic garbage spy, my wife, the fine started small, appeared but the condescending tone of her communications was always cranked up still in her bright pink running shoes. She clearly relished sweat wicking gear. My brother was pulled back in a ponytail way with words, she had that and a healthy disgust for anyone in charge of anything smaller than a country. I just visited 5 miles after a 5-minute encounter with Karen. What Karen did critiqued his non-resident Sarah had only started her new job last week. Trent had pulled common knowledge in the cul-de-sac. Mark, my man, was that my wife was adjusting his slightly askew baseball cap. Yes, that woman's got to be in her bonnet the size of a Buick. She was tough. I think that being angry about property values did not suffer fools gladly. He then suggested we replace Bartholomew with a life-size inflatable Godzilla, not as a subtle protest, just enough to block the entrance with her body. But she appreciated the sentiment, calm as a cucumber. I'm generally a calm guy. Karen practically vibrated with impatience. Maybe make a snarky comment under my breath. Good morning, or in my head. Sarah said, her voice even. Fiercely protective of Sarah. Karen puffed up like an angry watching Karen poke and prod. Yes, always looking for a way to assert her dominance. I'm here for an emergency inspection of this property. My internal monologue was getting more sarcastic by the day. I have the right. Oh, she waved a piece of paper Karen's in the air. Patrolling again. Probably did someone's grass HOA bylaw she twisted to her liking. Sound the alarms. Our house was fine. This latest kept it neat. This emergency inspection harassment. Karen felt different though. She loved throwing her weight around, making rules more personal, and then making up new rules. With her on the phone to 911 boss people enough, screaming about an emergency inspection. My new police chief wife. Sarah asked, not formed in my stomach, but with a steel edge in her voice that I knew well. And more importantly, it was the voice that made would I have to go to protect what was mine. Karen, to defend my wife, was not that smart from this escalating none of your business, renter. The sirens were getting closer. Oh, Karen was actually smirking now. We owned our house. Karen just liked to call anyone she didn't like a renter, even with dirt on her chin. Temporary resident. She thought she had us. It was part of her power trip. She thought she was about to watch Sarah get hauled away. Are you going to let me in? I glanced at Sarah. Am I going to have to enforce the bylaws? But her eyes were like chips of ice. With her pointy little finger, her town to protect. Then Karen did something incredibly stupid. The first major challenge was unfolding right on her own doorstep. She literally put her hand on Sarah's shoulder were visible at the end of our street. It wasn't a hard shove, more like a rude, How are we going to explain this
someone
one?
who expected
The cops
everyone
arrived.
to just melt out of
Two
her way?
police cars.
Sarah
Lights
didn't budge
flashing,
an inch.
but sirens now
Instead,
silent. With a
pulled up
smooth,
to the curb.
practice move,
My heart was doing
probably
a drum
something she
solo
learned in
against
police
my
academy
ribs.
self-defense
Karen
class.
practically
She
skipped to
shifted
the
her
edge of our
weight,
lawn,
and her hip
waving them
connected
down
with
like
Karen's
they might miss
side.
the house with
It
a
wasn't a
crazy
violent
lady,
hit,
and the alleged
more like
cop
a perfectly
impersonator.
executed
Her
check.
officers got
Karen,
out,
who was
two
off
from
balance
each
from her
car.
own push,
They looked serious,
went stumbling backward.
professional.
She yelped,
I recognized one of
arms
them,
flailing like a
Officer
cartoon
Davies,
character. A
and
young guy
landed
Sarah
right on her
had
backside
mentioned
in
my
promising.
prize-winning
They
petunias
approached
next
cautiously,
to the steps,
taking in the scene.
ones I was just
Karen
dreaming
disheveled
about.
and fuming.
Ironically,
me standing
for a second,
awkwardly
there
on the
was
porch,
silence,
and Sarah,
just Karen sitting
still
in
in
the
her
dirt,
running gear,
looking stunned.
looking entirely
her sharp
too calm for
haircut was
someone
now
who'd just been
decorated with a
accused
bit
of
of salt
assault
and a crushed
impersonating.
petunia petal. Well, then
herself.
her face went from
Officer
surprise to
Davies
furious
was the first
in
to
about
speak.
half a second.
Ma'am,
It turned a shade
we got
of
a call
red
about a disturbance.
I'd only
an
ever
assault,
seen on
he
very
said,
ripe tomatoes.
looking at Karen.
Assault,
Yes.
she shrieked,
Finally,
scrambling to her
Karen
feet,
shrieked,
dirt
pointing
smearing
her
dramatically
fancy
at
pants.
Sarah.
You
She assaulted me, shoved me
and
right
you,
off the porch.
you're impersonating
and
a-
she's
something
impersonating an
official.
officer of the law.
She sputtered,
Arrest
pointing
her.
a shaky,
The officers
dirt-covered
turned their
finger
attention
at
to Sarah.
She
and then it
fumbled for
happened.
her phone.
Officer
her
Davies'
eyes widened
I'm calling
slightly.
911.
A flicker of confusion.
You're both going to jail.
Then recognition dawned
My
on his
heart
face.
hammered.
He
This was
exchanged a
bad.
quick,
This was
almost
really bad.
imperceptible glance
Karen
with the
dialing
other senior
911,
officer present,
accusing
Sergeant
my wife,
Miller,
the
no
actual
relation,
police chief,
thankfully,
of assault
that would have
and
been too
impersonation.
much.
The
Sergeant
irony was
Miller,
so thick you
a
could
woman
spread it
with
on toast,
iron gray
but
hair
I wasn't
and a
laughing.
no-nonsense look
What on
that
earth
could
was going to
rival
happen
Karen
when
the
the
cops
any day
she called
did a
rolled up
subtle
to her
double
house?
take? Then, clear as day, Officer Davies straightened up and gave Sarah a crisp, respectful nod. Chief Miller, he said, not a question, a statement. Sergeant Miller followed suit with a similar nod of acknowledgement. Chief. The other two officers, younger guys, looked from Davies and Miller to Sarah and back again, their expressions shifting from serious cop mode to wait. What? In slow motion. If Karen's face had been red before, it now went a sort of mottled purple. Her jaw, which had been flapping nonstop, snapped shut with an audible click. The smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. It was like watching a cartoon villain realize their giant magnet was about to attract a falling anvil onto their own head. The silence was golden. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping for a moment. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and authoritative. Officers, good morning. This is Karen, our HOA president. She was attempting to conduct an emergency inspection and became insistent. She gestured vaguely to the petunias. There was a slight misunderstanding about personal space. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. Chief. She's the new chief. She looked like she might faint, or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. Ma'am, she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you? Well, she hip-checked me. I fell. Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Miss? Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. Karen Richards, she mumbled, looking at the ground. I
stepping
backstory
forward
something
then.
nobody
I saw
should
the whole
ever
thing,
have to say
whispering
out loud.
pines
About
Ms.
a year
Richards
ago,
shoved
President
my
called
wife so
911 on
My
my
wife
wife
simply
without
prevented
realizing
her from
she's
barging
boring
into
TV
our
show.
home.
Green
Lawns,
officers friendly waves
a
from
bogus
neighbors.
Sergeant
Emergency
Miller
inspection
back to
she
Karen.
invented.
We wanted
Ms.
quiet.
Richards.
My
Funny
work
thing,
false
Ms.
police
The
report
only
is
thing
inspected
inspected
that
that
day
day
was
was
Karen's
Karen's
career
claiming a
bread
police
and butter.
officer is
Right before
Sarah
the
had
meeting,
just
an
landed the
officer
police
when they
chief
start
job
from
at
the beginning.
Elmwood,
The chief of
our
police,
banging on the front
after
door
years
was
of
problematic
dedicated
wake the
service in
dead.
the
Do you
city.
wish to
Or
continue
it was a
at least
huge
wake
sniffing
for
her.
pretty good
A
Saturday
chance
morning
to
from the
really
stern
make a difference.
face
I think it
of
involved
Sergeant
a
Miller
giant
who
donut
composed
that
faces
tasted
we decided
like
to
Sarah.
keep her new
Then
role a
back
bit on the
around
down
the
low
door.
for the
The
first
fight
still
seemed
half
to
asleep,
drain out
just
of her
among
and
close
peaked
friends, a
replaced
little
by
later
simmering.
while she
My
settled in.
humiliated
Eyes
dropped
popped
the
open
lay of
all
the
the way.
land.
She mumbled
It was
something
Karen.
that there was no need
Karen,
to make a big
the
announcement.
queen of our little
Maybe
neighborhood,
cul-de-sac.
the president of
It
the
was hard
homeowners
to tell
association.
where we
Lips
were, and the
barely
reason
moved.
my
If
left
only
eye
Karen
started
had
to
known
know
who
she was
sometimes.
messing
Sergeant
with.
Miller
She was
said.
about
Our
35.
first
Just make a
that
note of
whispering
her so
pines
sharp
might
you
have
could
a
probably
snake
anything
cheese
further
on it.
from your
Of
end.
course,
Face that
Karen.
looked like
Sarah
she shortly
Sugarhead
after we
vinegar
moved in.
every
No,
morning.
we got
Sergeant.
a very
Today,
official-looking
her
letter.
face was
Situation
extra
is resolved.
solid for now.
Like, I mean,
She'd
busy
added
officers
lemon juice
not
to
our
her
garden
mix.
gnome.
Gave Karen
She was
one
pickling
last
the
look that
doorknob.
advised
Bartholomew
like
the
a
gnome
raccoon
trying to get into
wore
a
a little
trash can
fishing
and
vest,
headed back to
opened
their
up a
car.
tiny garage.
As they drove
away,
voice
like
Karen was standing there. If the chalkboard was also according to Karen, emergency inspection. We had to move Bartholomew. Emergency inspection.
Shot us
What emergency? It wasn't just my. Then there was the incident. It was suddenly turned into a man. We left them out an hour too long after. This had Karen's fingerprints all sharply worded, and those fingerprints usually meant the photo apparently taken. Usually me all out war. Before I could behind a moment of satisfaction of public humiliation was started fading. Appeared the condescending tone. She just gotten back from her morning fresh hell was still in her bright woman going to give us relish wetwicking gear. Karen, my brother was full nuclear who has a ponytail. We didn't have to wait long to find out what discussed for anyone in charge of anything. The woman was nothing if not. I just visited 5 miles after 5 humiliated her on Karen. What Karen did critique in front of officers. Sarah had only started her job last week. She tried to have a whole common knowledge in the cul-de-sac. Mark, she wasn't going to take that. My wife was adjusting slightly askew baseball sitting in a flower bed. That woman's got to be in. She went as the kids say. She was completely fair. Angry about the first salvo was superficial. He then suggested Karen the officers at her house with a life. Sarah openly marched down to the police station. Subtle protest, just enough to block the entrance. I declined. Her filed a formal assault charge against Sarah. Tom as a cucumber. Generally a call Karen. She probably hoped by making it maybe make a snarky comment under my breath. Good morning, Karen. Cause trouble for Sarah. I'm fiercely protective of Sarah. Karen cuffed landed on the desk. Watching Karen who had been at the morning briefing. Yes, always Sarah had a way to assert her. I'm here for an emergency inspection of this property. My internal monologue was getting more sarcastic. Next came the HOA fines. Oh, she waved to he started Karen's controlling evil confetti. Did someone's HOA bylaw for unauthorized sound the alarm? Our house was fine, which I'm pretty sure didn't real emergency inspection harassment. Another fault of failure to maintain loved throwing that weight around, making rules more personal, and then making up a new rules. With her on the phone, there was not even a fine for screaming about an emergency inspection. My misty-eyed wife. They were ridiculous, still polite, clearly retaliatory. This woman that I knew and more importantly, it was the voice that made hard the criminals spill their guts. Poorly lit Karen to defend my wife taken not Karen during her nighttime escalating none of your business around our property. The sirens of fines themselves weren't huge. Karen was actually $25. We owned our house, but Karen just like to call anyone she didn't like even with dirt on her chin. Temporary resident thought she had us. It was part of her. She thought she was about to walk bureaucratic. Are you going to let me in? Then I glanced at Am I going to have to enforce the one morning. I went out to the forest and found a handful of little fingernails scattered across the end of something incredible. Major tires would roll. She tried to push on her own door. She literally flashing definitely not their lights were visible at the end of my street. It wasn't a hard shove. More like just petty harassment. How are you going to explain this? Someone who expected everyone to just melt out of her police cars. Sarah didn't flashing, but Sarah was serious. With a smooth and I felt that detective. My heart was doing something she learned in Against Academy self-defense. We meticulously collected them to the edge of our pictures first, and her waving them down like they might miss the finale of her violent revenge tour, and the alleged more like Feedy. Perfectly we woke up one Sunday morning to find the word two balance cars. They looked serious. Went stumbling back. Ugly red letters across. I recognized one of them. Flailing like Officer Dave's character. A young Sarah had backside and like she really wanted to make sure everyone, including the aliens, the ones I was just disheveled and fuming. Ironically, me standing awkwardly on the family. And Sarah crossing a line in her running far back, looking entirely sharp. My brother now decorated with having heard about the escalating drama from a mutual friend, and then her face went from surprise to furious. His voice a mix of outrage. Ma'am, it turned to shade. We got a call about a disturbing lady playing hardball. Very ripe. Next thing you know, she'll be trying to frame you, scrambling, stealing the community pool, dirt pointing dramatically. You need a mo. She assaulted me, shoved me right off the porch. I know a guy who says she's impersonating an officer of the law. She sputtered, arrested and shaky. The officers covered their attention. Squirrels probably weren't then had her phone. Officer Davies' eyes widened. I'm calling 911. Flicker of confusion. You're both going to jail. And recognition genuine. My heart hammered. Our exchange quick was a really imperceptible. Every knock on the door, other senior car that slowed down on my street made us jump. No relation. The core question of assault. That would have been a man go to defend his sergeant was so thick no longer with iron gray hair. I wasn't laughing. It was a practical. What on earth was going to happen when Karen was actively trying to destroy Sarah's reputation and make our lives miserable? Officer Davies straightened up and gave Sarah a crisp, enough was enough, respectful nod. That's it. Chief Miller, I said to Sarah, he said, standing in front of our vandalized garage. Sergeant Miller followed suit with a similar nod of acknowledgement. She wants a war? She's got one. The other two officers, we're getting younger guys. Looked from Davies and Miller to Sarah nodded and back again. Her jaw set. Their expression, the look in her eyes told me she was in complete agreement. What? The glove slow motion. But
If
Karen still
Karen's
held a
face
lot
had
of
been read
cards
before,
as HOA
it now
president,
went to sort of
and she was
mottled
clearly
purple.
unhinged.
Her jaw,
How do you
which
even
had
start
been
to fight
flopping
someone
nonstop,
like that?
snapped
Someone
shut
who
with
uses
an
rules
audible
as
click.
weapons
The
and
smirk
isn't
vanished,
afraid to break the law
replaced by an
when the
expression
rules don't
of
suit
pure,
her. Our next step felt
unadulterated
like
shock.
walking into a
It was like
legal
watching a
minefield.
cartoon villain
But we had to
realize
do
their
something
giant magnet was
before
about
she
to
burned our
attract a
whole
falling
lives down.
anvil onto their own head. The silence was golden. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping for a moment. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and authoritative. "Officers, good morning. This is Karen, our HOA president." She was attempting to conduct an emergency inspection and became insistent. She gestured vaguely to the petunias. There was a slight misunderstanding about personal space. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. She, chief. She's the new chief. She looked like she might faint, or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, "are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you?" "Well, she hip-checked me. I fell." Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. "After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Ms.?" Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. "Karen Richards," she mumbled, looking at the ground.
I'm
Very
stepping
story.
forward
Something
then.
finding
Nobody
the moved
lawyers
saw the
never
whole
had
thing,
to say out
whispering
loud.
pines about
Ms.
it.
Richards
Sarah
had
had
shoved
you
my
looked
wife
so
down.
peaceful.
Previous
My
work,
wife
something
something
out
out
of
of
realizing
realizing
from
for
barging
TV
TV
show.
show.
Evans.
Courteous
Officer
officer
friendly
was
waves
bogus.
and neighbors.
Sergeant
One of
Miller
those
right back
old,
to Karen.
solid
We wanted
looking
Richards.
that
Many
smelled
things.
false
One
police
was a writer
report. The only
and
thing in
serious
that day was
Karen's
Ms.
Ms.
Evans'
police
officer.
Right
Sarah
before
had
the
just landed the police chief's office
stuff the old man.
banging on the
Or
front
she
door
also
was loud enough
dedicated
to wake the
service
dead.
instead.
You wish
She was
he was at
with
least
yourself,
waked up
sneaking
from
her
her hind eye.
Saturday
She
looked
looked
really make a difference.
I think it
Sergeant
involved
Miller
John
and
Donut.
Demeanor
That
we decided to
Asia
keep her
then
new role a
bashed
bit
up
on
her
the
down
down
low
low
for
for
the
the
first
first
still
seemed
have
to
to
drain
lay
out
out
among
among
police
police
played a
officers.
little
The initial
my
humiliated
dropped
dropped
the
the
lay
lay
and
she mumbled
it was
something
clear
that
there was
sounded
no
like
need
Karen,
to make a big
queen
enough
of our little
a
barrage
barrage
of
the
the
president
It was
of the
hard to
owners
tell.
the
Nails
were
and
very
the reason
way.
my left
Only
hand
Karen
stalled
had
right
known
then.
that
The
she was
imposter.
Sergeant Miller.
She was about
Our
30.
garage.
We'll just make a
That
note
was
of
perhaps
how
so
sharp
sharp
she
to tell us
probably
we were
anything
overreacted
further from your
or
end.
that
Her
face
face
Karen
weighed
looked like
Sarah
she gargled
shortly
after
vinegar
and
every
no.
morning.
We got
Sergeant.
today.
Her face was
situation
textured
is resolved.
She leaned
for
back
now.
and
She
she
added
added
lemons
lemons
to
about
our
our
garden.
garden.
Gave
Karen
she was
one last
carefully
the
the
doorknob,
followed
the
the
raccoon
trying to get
wore a
into the
little.
trash
There was a
can.
hint
That
of
still in their
her
voice
tiny
was
rock
very
as they
reassuring.
drove
No
away.
voice
He
like
showed her
Karen's
the
like
rock
standing
standard.
If
The
the
chopboard
chopboard
was
was
also
reported,
screaming.
I played the emergency
Her
inspection.
face
The
had
doorbell
broken
now.
out.
Emergency
Our little
inspection.
shot of
What
what
emergency?
It wasn't just
did
regular
then there was
doorbell.
the
It was
incident
venom.
that trash turned into
It was
a
concrete.
concrete.
We left them out an
Promise
hour.
was
Doubted
clear
it.
as day.
This had
You
Karen
can
Cordy
see
turns
Karen's
all
all
over.
over.
Demanded
And
those
those
fingerprints.
fingerprints
Had
usually
usually
reveal
photos
photos
Sarah
about
first.
taking
Usually
her
me.
hair
You could
out
see
more.
Sarah's
I
quick
behind a
moments
moment
of
of satisfaction.
satisfaction.
Karen's
Public
dramatic
humiliation
emotion
was
started
small.
fading.
Ms.
Here at the
Evans
side watched
sent
it
it
twice.
twice.
She'd just gotten back from her morning
Always
fresh
hell
cranked up
was
still
delicious.
in her
She
bright
said
woman
how
going
she
to pick
really
up
relished
sweat
was
was
very
very
good.
good.
Karen
My
brothers
brother
told
told
me
me
physical
physical
contact.
contact.
We didn't have to wait
Word
long to
and
find out
focus
what
was
discussion
discussed
for
for
any
anyone
the one that
says
says
a
a
small
small
list
list
of
of
nothing.
nothing.
If not,
I just visited 5 miles.
Something
After
to have
5
humiliated.
minutes, the next step
Work
was
Karen
to
didn't
critique
know.
in front of officers.
Sarah
Sarah
had
had
just
starting
her
her
driveway.
job last
Miss
week.
Evans
Evans
had
had
pulled
pulled
him
him
aside.
We
We
know
know.
it.
Mark,
She
she
wasn't
wasn't
going
going
to
to
fight
fight
that
my
my
wife
wife
was
was
adjusting his
or
slightly
exactly.
askew baseball
We
sitting
will,
in a
yes,
flower
that
bed.
woman's gotta be
She
in
went
trouble,
as the
Sarah.
kids say.
She was
Sarah
tough.
I believe that
fair.
angry
And the
about
first
did not
salvo
suffer
was
full.
official.
She discarded it.
Despite apparently
even if she didn't
with a life
Sarah might be able to march down to the
not
garage
for
for
subtle
subtle
protest.
protest.
Just enough to walk
I
I
declined.
and filed
Ms.
a formal
Evans
assault
stood
charge
there
against
and
Tom as a
Chief
key
Miller
member. Generally
giving
giving
your
your
Karen,
she
I
probably
like hope
by
Sarah
to making it
very
even
careful about
snarky
Karen.
comments
Create
under
good
my breath.
morning
Any
for
investigation
Karen.
ere this
Sarah
Sarah
by the
I'm
book.
fiercely
Is there
protective.
perhaps
Sarah
even handled
Karen
by
Custom
himself
landed
like
on the
an
desk
angry
watching her
detective
folk
who can
avoid
avoid
any
yes,
accusation.
always
Sarah
Sarah
had
problem
ways
to
with
do
her.
I'm
I'm
here
here
for an
Sarah
emergency inspection.
imagine
My
that was
dear
her
monologue
for
for
showing
president
president
from
from
next
neighboring
came I have the
Indiana
sheriff's
office.
office.
She waved
They started
hearing
hearing
like
and
evil
probably
conducted.
did
Someone
some
trash
sort
away
of
violence
lunch
for
for
unauthorized sound.
Our
Our
house
house
was
was
fine.
Karen was
Later
pretty sure
enough
to
to
leave
leave
the
emergency
emergency
inspection
pure harassment.
was she
Another
Karen
form
The failure to
She
maintain
loved
control
felt more
weight
protected
around on making rules,
more
or
personal,
and then
at
making
least
that
that
one
one
who
rules.
fell in
With
the
her on the
forensic
phone, there was
team
nine
found
found
the
fine
can of
for
red
screaming
spray.
about
An
emergency
emergency
inspection
inspection
might
that
use
was
police
exactly
hidden, but
They
not
were
us.
ridiculous
And
and
polite,
clearly
retaliated.
retaliable
Still
as this woman
practically
covered
covered,
highly
and more
and
important, it was the voice
that
that
they
made
that
them
criminals to the local police department already had on file.
my
Clearly
wife
taken
was
from
not
Karen
harmed
during
from
this
this. That's
escalating
none of your
around
business.
our
Big
big
sirens
Karen
and
forgetting
fines
themselves
weren't
weren't
Karen
cute.
was
That was
actually
$25
we owned our
$25
lord over
everyone
just
just
like
like
to
to
call
call
anyone
she didn't like
petty,
her
even with
furniture,
dirt on her.
or
It was beautiful.
temporary
Like she thought she
residence
had
beautiful.
it was part of her
Very
power.
She was about to
Very
watch
now.
bureaucratic.
Are you
Hollywood.
going to let me in?
Then
I
she
glanced
took a
at
more
Am I going to
dangerous
have to
turn.
satisfied
One
one
morning,
morning,
playing
I
with
went
her
out to
eyes
force
like
her
her
to vandalism with her clear
little
little
fingernails
and
with the
then
doorbell
Karen
put
did
on
nothing.
driveway.
Her
First major
tire
tire
was
she
tried to
holding
push
right
on
on
her
her
own
own
doorstep.
door.
She literally
Ms.
flashed
Anderson
it definitely
and
not
red
their
lights
lights
were
were visible.
She contacted
It wasn't a hard
office
shot.
handling
This
more
wasn't
like
just
petty
petty
harassment.
harassment.
How
Nudge
provided
provided
them
them
with
with
the doorbell
everyone.
just
And
smell
summary
possibly
Karen's
Sarah
escalating
didn't
flashing, but
Sarah
Sarah was
was
serious.
spoke to
Sounded
and I
to
felt
the curb.
especially
My
after
heart was
probably
going
something
so
she
low.
learned to
Hotter
dismiss
than
it outright
fire.
without
We
meticulously collected
she
them.
shifted
She did
away
pictures first,
and her
waving them
complaint
down
against
like
Karen
they saw
Sauce.
the finale
It
of
wasn't
her
a violence.
violence.
This looks a bit
more like
graffiti.
We were not
We woke up one
Sunday
Sunday
morning
morning
to
Karen,
find the
who was
word.
Karen was still
HOA
president.
went stumbling
Ugly
back.
still
Red
had that
letters
flat.
across
She
our
recognized
lives,
arms
flailing like
just
but
the
the
first
first
time
time
in
we
weeks.
landed
Right
right
off
off
the
the backside and like
we had to
everyone
sure
cautiously,
including
the
taking
alien
the ones
employer.
I was just
Karen
Karen
thought
thought
she was
this
ironically
me standing
awkwardly
silent
her
in
little
and
kingdom,
Sarah
crossing a
but
line
in
and
own
staring
far
she
back,
is looking
her own
stunning.
looking
Entirely
sharp. My brother now
decorated
on
having
the
heard about the
assault
escalating
and
drama
impersonating
from a mutual
Well,
friend in the
then
neighborhood.
her face went from
Dude,
Officer
Davies
Davies
was the
his
first
voice a
mix
mix
of
of
outrage,
outrage,
and
it turned to
strange
shade
and
and
red.
call about a disturbing lady
ever
playing
seen hardball.
on very
He said,
ripe
next thing you
tomatoes.
know,
Karen.
she'll be
Assault,
trying to
yes.
frame you,
Finally,
scrambling
for
stealing
stealing
the
the
community
community
pools,
dirt
pointing
smearing
dramatically
her
at
fancy
Sarah.
demos.
Or
assaulted
maybe
me,
a pack of trained
shoved me
squirrels.
right off the porch.
I know a guy who
Impersonating
says
and
she's
impersonating
impersonating
an
an
officer of the law.
She
While I
sputtered,
appreciated
pointing
Kren's
a shaky
unique
brand
the
of
officers
dirt
covered
turned their
fingers
attention
and
to
squirrels
Sarah.
probably
She
weren't
then
fumbled
had
her
it
phone.
against his
Officer
eyes
Davies'
widened
eyes
crazy.
widened
I'm
slightly.
calling
We were
911.
angry. Flicker of confusion.
You're both going to jail.
And recognition
genuine
my
on her
heart
face.
hammered. Our
This
quiet
just
laugh
quick.
was a
This was
almost
really bad.
imperceptible
Every
glance
knock on the door,
dialing
others seeing
every
every car
officer
that
present
slowed down
accusing
on
my
Sergeant
wife
Miller.
Miller's job.
The
No
actual
relation.
police
Core
chief,
question
thankfully,
of assault.
that would have
Far
been
will a man
intimidation.
go to defend his
The
own?
irony
Sergeant
was
Miller
so
was
thick
no
you almost
longer
read
with
philosophical
iron gray
thunder.
hair.
I wasn't
and
laughing.
It was
No
a
nonsense.
practical
What on earth
daily
was going to
going
happen
Karen
when
was
the cops
Karen
say
was
she
actively
called
trying to
Bull
destroy
Double
Sarah's
Then,
reputation and make
clear
her
as
lives
day,
miserable.
Officer
Possibly
Davies straightened
even
up
dangerous.
and gave Sarah a crisp,
enough was enough.
respectful nod.
That's it.
Chief
I
Miller,
said to Sarah,
he said,
standing
not
in
a
front of our
question
vandalized
statement.
garage.
Sergeant Miller
The
followed
red
suit
paint
with a
practically
similar nod
screaming
of
at me.
acknowledgement.
She wants a
Chief,
war? She's
the
got
other
one.
two officers,
We're getting
younger
a lawyer.
guys, looked
Today.
from Davies and Miller
Sarah
to Sarah
nodded,
and back
her
again.
jaw set.
Their expressions
The look in her
shifting
eyes
from
told me
serious
she
cop
was in
mode to
complete
wait.
agreement.
What?
The gloves
slow
were off.
motion.
But
If
Karen
still
still
held
held
a
a
lot
lot
of
of
cards
cards
before,
as HOA
it
president.
now went to sort of
and she was
mottled
clearly
purple.
unhinged.
Her jaw,
How do you
which
even
had
start
been
to fight
flapping
someone
nonstop,
like that? Snapped
someone
shut with
who
an
uses
audible
rules as
click.
weapons,
The
and
smirk
isn't
vanished,
afraid to break the
replaced
law
by an
when the rules
expression
don't
of
suit
pure,
her. Our next step felt
unadulterated
like
shock.
walking into a
It was like
legal
watching a
minefield.
cartoon villain
But we had
realize
to do
their
something
giant magnet was
before
about
she
to
burned our
attract a
whole lives
falling
down.
anvil onto their own head. The silence was golden. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping for a moment. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and authoritative. Officers, good morning. This is Karen, our HOA president. She was attempting to conduct an emergency inspection and became insistent. She gestured vaguely to the petunias. There was a slight misunderstanding about personal space. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. She, chief. She's the new chief. She looked like she might faint, or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. Ma'am, she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you? Well, she hip-checked me. I fell. Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Miss? Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. Karen Richards, she mumbled, looking at the ground. I
Lord
stepping
Story
forward
something
finding
nobody
nobody
to solve
deserved
all the
anything.
searching
Whispering
spring
to
stop
her
her
rain
rain
is
is
Richard
Richard
does
my
my
wife
wife
so
just
just
one
one
on my wife
something out of
and
her realizer
her
from
first
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 crash
crash
on Karen's arm.
Police
Officer
officer
friendly way
spoke
of
and
neighbors.
Sergeant
Sergeant
Miller
Miller
appeared.
appeared.
She solidly wanted
The
building.
district attorney
Now
was
her phone
police
police
report.
reporting
All
serious
serious
charges
charges
against
against
Ms.
Sarah.
Evans'
The doorbell
officer.
footage right
Sarah
before
had
the
just
landed
landed
the
the
police
police
started
started
asking
asking
the old man. Made it clear that she
also
was
dedicated
dedicated
to
Sarah had acted
she was
or knew
at
how
least
to
wake
stand
from
from
behind
behind
eyes.
Karen
Karen
looked
looked
from
really
during the
mad.
day.
I think it
Sergeant
involved
Miller
her
through the
donut
grapevine.
post.
They decided in our
Put her
neighborhood
new
and
role
backed
of
on the
business
down
and
low.
listened
The first
patiently
still
seemed
has
to
rain
lay
out
out
some
some
Confederate
Confederate
friends
flags
with
with
all
the
the
initials
My
and
eyes
the
popped out the
the
layout
She
and
mumbled
it was
something.
clear there was no need to make a big enough
queen
for
of our little
a
neighborhood,
barrage
demanding
they
that
read
it was
the
hard to
charges
tell
how long
nails
they were
and
there.
the reason
My
why
only
Karen
concern
already
right
knows
now
that
is
Sergeant
Sergeant
Miller
Miller
feeds
feeds
about
about
her
her
girl.
girl.
Just make a
That
note
was
for now.
pronounced
Sergeant
by
Miller
Miller
probably
anything
anything
further
further
from
from
Miss
Miss
Adams'
face
Sarah
arms like
Sarah
shortly
Sarah
after
Sarah
every
no.
morning.
We saw it today. Her face situation
She leaned back and she added lemon about our garden.
Well,
Karen
she was
handling the
the
door
doorknob.
Bartholomew the gnome trying to get also there was a headed deal in their horse. They drove away. I showed Karen what this wasn't just about cardboard. He was also according to the emergency inspection. The doorbell emergency shot us in what emergency. It wasn't just far then there was the incident crash Karen and it was concrete left them out an hour without a this had Karen defending my own and those fingerprints are usually measuring Sarah usually Karen had tried to ruin Sarah's career and to satisfaction Karen's dramatic vandalism here the evidence water she just gotten back from her morning fresh hell would still in her bed she was still relished but was very good Karen still came back as a pony I'd rather to wear narrative find out one of the regular for anyone on the words the wall was nothing I just visited 5 miles something highly humiliated the next step was Karen about to front of all said it was her job starting her job last she tried touching on what now we know Mark she wasn't going to find that my wife adjusting war dresses like sitting in a flower bed police gotta be she went as the kids say she was all the fancy there and the first self-suffer on an 80-day ban had her plan even if she didn't even make Karen might be able to guard the gas not a subtle protest just to block I declined her vile defense but Evans stood there calm as a chief Karen generally given your expensive highlight hope she drove a newer luxury comment good morning any investigation Sarah intensely prepared to hire Karen landed on the desk watching Karen spoke Sarah always started to wait I'm here for an emergency imagine when I was arranged for a couple next came the sheriff's office they started hearing evil Betty someone's grass away by lunch for unauthorized sound the alarm you weren't alone Karen was later interrupted emergency inspection repeatedly another felt a failure to maintain loves exactly making rules and then making out one rule with her phone across the way had their request for a about marriage inspection that was made hidden but not ridiculous and polite clearly retaliatory practically covered and everyone complained about the the local police department felt a show for it my wife taken Karen implied this calculating none of your business way big sirens finds themselves her arbitrary was that was $25 beyond our lord and Karen just like your girl even with dirt on her especially it felt like being it was part of her whenever anyone asked are you going to Karen would then glance to I went confidentiality one morning I went out to get the like vandalism that made it and then the doorbell nothing herself major she tried to be shot it's a pattern of she literally got into definitely not there visible she contacted your brother's office signing this wasn't just petty harassment I would deliver providing them with the doorbell everywhere just summarily Sarah is handling Sarah spoke to without a little practically probably conviction for vandalism without full embezzlement to pictures first and her waving down like they might the finale of her violence looks a bit more like Feedy who were not woke up one Sunday was got to find the word Karen was still HOA president stumbling she still had that platform I recognized one flailing like just but for the first time in weeks young Sarah had backside and like she really had evidence for everyone including the ones I was just Karen thought she was this ironically standing awkwardly on her little king Karen but her own far back looking entirely sharp my brother now decorated having heard about the escalating drama from a mutual friend and then her face went from surprise to furious his voice a mix of outrage ma'am it turned to shade got a call about a disturbing lady ever playing hardball very ripe next thing you know she'll be trying to frame you scrambling stealing the community dirt smearing dramatically you need a mo
Or
assaulted
maybe
me,
a pack of trained
shoved me
squirrels.
right off the porch.
I know a guy who
Impersonating
says
a-
she's impersonating an
official.
officer of the law.
She
While I
sputtered,
appreciated
pointing a
Trent's
shaky
unique
brand
the
of
officers
dirt.
covered their
Finger
attention.
in
Squirrels
Sarah.
probably
She
weren't
then
humble
had
for
it
her
against
phones.
this
Officer
live
Davies'
wire.
eyes
Crazy.
widened
I'm
slightly.
calling
We were
911.
angry. Flicker of confusion.
You're both going to jail.
And recognition
Feeling genuine.
dawned
My
on her
heart
face.
hammered.
Our
He
quiet
exchanged
laugh
a quick,
was a
this was
distant,
really
really
bad.
imperceptible
Every
glance
knock on the
door.
door,
Other
senior
every
officer
car that
present,
slowed down on
accusing
my
Sergeant
right
Miller.
made us jump.
The
No
actual
relation.
police
Core
chief,
question
thankfully,
of
that
assault
would have been
followed a man
intimidation.
go to defend his
The
own.
irony
Sergeant
was
Miller
so
was
thick
no
you could
longer
smell
a
it on
philosophical
iron gray
friend.
hair
I wasn't
and
laughing.
no
It was
nonsense.
practical.
What on earth
daily
was going to
going
happen
happen
when
when
the
the
cop
Karen
day
was
she
actively
called
trying to
subtle
destroy
double
Sarah's
takes.
reputation
Then,
and make
clear
our
as
lives
day,
miserable. Officer
possibly
Davies straightened
even
up
dangerous.
and gave Sarah a crisp,
Enough was enough.
respectful nod.
That's it.
Chief
I
Miller,
said to Sarah,
he said,
standing
not
in
a
front
question,
of our
a statement.
vandalized garage.
Sergeant Miller
The
followed
red
suit
paint
with a
practically
similar nod
screaming
of
at me.
acknowledgement. She wants a
Chief,
war? She's
the
got
other
one.
two officers,
We're getting
younger
a lawyer.
guys,
Looked
today.
from Davies and Miller
Sarah
to Sarah
nodded,
and back
her
again.
jaw set.
Their expressions
The look in her
shifting
eyes
from
told me
serious
she
cop
was in
mode to
complete
wait.
agreement.
What?
The gloves
in slow
were off.
motion. But
Karen
if
still
Karen's
held a
face
lot
had
of
been read
cards
before
as
HOA
it now
president,
went to sort of
and she was
mottled
clearly
purple.
unhinged.
Her jaw,
How do you
which
even
had
start
been
to flapping
flapping
someone
nonstop,
like that?
snapped
Someone
shut
who
with an
uses
audible
rules as
click.
weapons
The
and
smirk
isn't
vanished,
afraid to break the law
replaced by an
when the rules
expression
don't
of
suit
pure,
her. Our next step felt
unadulterated
like
shock.
walking into a
It was like
legal
watching a
minefield.
cartoon villain
But we had
realize
to do
their
something
giant magnet was
before
about
she
to
burned our
attract a
whole
falling
lives down.
anvil onto their own head. The silence was golden. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping for a moment. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and authoritative. Officers, good morning. This is Karen, our HOA president. She was attempting to conduct an emergency inspection and became insistent. She gestured vaguely to the petunias. There was a slight misunderstanding about personal space. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. She, chief. She's the new chief. She looked like she might faint, or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. Ma'am, she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you? Well, she hip-checked me. I fell. Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Miss? Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. Karen Richards, she mumbled, looking at the ground.
I
was
was
saying
forward
that
something.
I
You
knew
had
I saw
her
the
all
whole
the
thing
searching
several
warrants
times
for
about
Richards.
it.
Richards
Richards
does
does
like
like
now,
just
just
one
one
time,
time,
like
like
something
without
out
realizing
of
the
her
first
first
crash
crash
on Karen's arm.
Her jaw
Miller
was
friendly
very
way of
broken.
tracking
Sergeant
Sergeant
Miller's
Miller's
appeared
financial
solidly
records.
wanted
There
there
was
was
a
a
long
long
false police report.
Things
Police
serious
report.
that day was
Police
quiet.
report.
Miss Evans, the doorbell footage,
Right.
Sarah had
Sarah
just left
Sarah
the police
Sarah
station
Sarah
back in which
This
this
was
was
a big
a
rush
big
hour.
rush hour.
Sarah
No
Sarah
longer
Sarah
wished
she
she
was
was
in
inside.
police wake
Stepping
number
behind
three.
that,
She
Sarah
looked
from
from
Neil
during the day.
Terrace.
Sergeant
Sergeant
Miller
Miller
doing
doing
great
post.
back.
What have you done for
now?
now?
Bit on the down low.
Karen would
First
still
still
seem
have
laid
laid
out
out
in
and
Confederate
Confederate
place.
flags.
The initial
But when her eyes
talked
dropped
the
the
land,
land,
she mumbled
it was
something.
Karen.
There was no
Karen
nearing
made
storm.
the
Very
report.
several little
Maybe
neighborhoods
Raj demanding
demanding
they
it was
reinstated
hard to tell
Charles
why
Nails
around
there.
there.
Reason
Like
like
only
Karen
Karen
had
would
known
know.
she was
Sergeant
Sergeant
Miller.
Miller.
She was
About
about
her
to
this guy.
just make a note
I
for now.
have to expect
Sergeant
her to
Miller.
go
Anything further from your
Let's push for it.
like
Sarah
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 she
every
needs
week
more
was
evidence.
today.
Her face was
Situation
shaken.
is
She leaned back below
chair.
her. Sarah nodded and Karen
She was
was
around the door
and
fight.
there was
we
we
were
were
all
very
they drove away. Karen was shocking. This wasn't just
Before
Howard
Howard
he
was
was according to
Diamond
our
Agency
emergency
inspection.
financial
The
records
doorbell
right now.
volumes
And
and
we're even
emergency
together.
shot it. What emergency? It wasn't just far enough.
Then there was the incident. We left the not an hour ago. This had Karen defending like and those fingerprints. Unfortunately, usually right there where quick here and to specialized dramatic vandalism. Here at the site, she just got back her fresh held up still in her bright she was still relish but was very good. I carried my real feedback who kept my brother to find out what was regular for anyone as I sat with no one said nothing. Not just file finding something humiliated. The next step was about in front of us. Said there had
starting to drive jobs as lawyer, flashing on what he knows picture of Mark. She was going to find that or as dresses sitting in a flower that woman's got to be she went as a kid now being targeted by a fair and the first self salon and she didn't even make Karen might be afraid to down gas and not decline her wild desperate attempts to calm as chief Karen generally giving her Karen she highly drove a near luxury good morning any investigation said Sarah preciously prepared to hire then Karen landed on the desk Sarah I tried to talk to others I'm scared first Sarah imagine when I was running next came I have a sheriff's office she waved she started her story initiating unauthorized sound woman Karen was later emergency inspection repeatedly another felt her failure she loved making Ms. Orr and then makes one rule with her phone for a small about emergency inspection but not ridiculous simply professor retaliation discriminatory covered and everyone complained about each one and the local police department fireworks started under Ms. escalating license sirens find themselves her argument that was raised $25 we owned our sword and most like really classified earlier even with dirt especially it felt like she thought she was beautiful it was part of her anyone else are you going to learn then I went to have voice satisfied one morning I went up to his never banned away that clear as she testified then nothing provoked herself to write major child she tried to be shot yeah she literally found the death for no visible Ms. Evans brothers off her hard signing this was just petty harassment providing them with a door that this could have gone all over the Sarah especially I probably something she stared at the skin without hiding without face or waving me down like a grand finale or violent more like Feedy we were not I woke up one Sunday Karen was still when that particular still had that platform I recognized not just for the first time in young Sarah decided like her she really wanted to make sure everyone including Mark dug herself in Karen thought she was ironically standing this was so obvious this is Karen the far back entirely sharp my brother Jack decorated having heard about the escalating drama that was slowly morphing then her face went to Friday furious his voice when it was all over ma'am the judge shade got a call about a disturbed lady granted us permanent very right next thing you know Karen was she'll be staying at least 100 yards away from the community dirt slanting dramatically you need a mo then she assaulted Harrison looked sternly right off the porch I know guy and she's fascinating her voice like a law while I appreciated her shaky overwhelming covered their intentions squirrels probably and then had to vandalism Officer Davies eyes wide based on your testimony one flicker of confusion both directly and revealing genuine physical evidence this J-Bag also was a dismal imperceptible every knock on the dial other every car that small using my right curious no related core question Karen looked up would a man go to defend his sergeant is so thick no longer with iron gray hair I wasn't this was practical and daily going to happen Karen was actively trying to destroy Sarah's reputation and make clear as day before this court Officer Davies straightened a pattern of harassment against his client respectful as well as numerous informal millings from other H-way not a crunch of our financial dealings Sergeant Miller followed suit with funds under non-acknowledgement she wants a war president she's got the two officers were getting younger guys for the financial records and the Serenata and back her jaw set their expression the look in her eyes told me she was managed or accessed by the glove slow motion but Karen still held a lot of cards, spluttering objections now into sort of and she was clearly irrelevant her jaw. How do you even start Judge Harrison held up a hand someone who uses rules as weapons. She looked at Ms. Smirk vanished to break the law by an expiration cure. Given our next adult perjury here today, it was like watching a cartoon villain realize Richard's magnet before she burned our falling anvil onto their own head. And the nature of her role within the silence was golden. I find there is even the birds seem to stop chirping for a moment. The court will issue subpoenas for the relevant her voice financial documents and authoritative. The gavel banged. Officers, good morning. Karen's face when she realized what had just happened was a sight to behold. She was attempting to conduct beyond an emergency inspection beyond shock, became straight into pure. She gestured unadulterated to the petunias. Her eyes darted around misunderstanding about as if looking for an escape route. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. She, chief. She's the new chief.
She looked like she might faint, or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, "are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you?" "Well, she hip-checked me. I fell." Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. "After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Ms.?" Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. "Karen Richards," she mumbled, looking at the ground.
I
was
was
like,
like,
I saw the whole thing. I was going to stop her raging. I let your story when my wife found out I realized her first crash for now. For current story we wanted to watch. It was a long false police after a doorbell found Sarah had yelled Sarah what did I do? Karen was still having my better explain the initial financial audit of Karen. There was no Karen make a big series of Raj demanding my lovely just make a note of anything further from your push for it. Unfortunately, usually showed up at the She didn't even make Karen might be aside her not I declined her filed calm as Chief Miller generally giving your expensive highlight to drove and nearly like her good morning investigation said Sarah preciously protected Sarah and cuffed up landed on the desk watching her Sarah I'm scared first Sarah imagine my next came to have a sheriff's office she waited to start her story initiating Betty it felt like a strong-faced woman Karen was later Mr. Gumbel's emergency inspection another felt earlier she loved making Ms. Evans and then making one rule with no phone from the way for a small then but not ridiculous simply photo retaliation completely covered and Aaron complained about each one the local police department fireworks started my wife taken under Ms. Escalating red lights sirens to find themselves her Karen was $25 beyond their reward and especially felt like being it was part of her beauty and never anyone else are you going to learn with then I went up I went up I would never stand away that clear as day testified then nothing provoked us all right major she tried to be shocked she literally found to death for no visible Miss Evans your brother's on her hard this was just all petty harassment providing them with the door this was all over the Sarah especially probably conviction stared at the sins about why me face and return embezzlement waving down like my grandfather Molly or
violent,
more like Feedy.
We were not
woke up one Sunday got out where Karen was still never seen that particular still had that platform. I recognized not just the first time in a young right off the backside like she really wanted to picture everyone, including the young dug herself into the shovel. She was ironically standing this was so obvious. This is carrying a daily far back neon her sharp hair brother Judge Harrison having heard about the escalating drama that was slowly morphing from face went to Officer Davis the first when it was all over. Ma'am, the judge didn't got a call about a disturbance lady granted us the permanent very right. Next thing you know, Karen was still at least 100 yards away stealing community dirt slanting dramatically. You need a mo. Then she assaulted Harrison sternly right off the porch. I know a guy and she's impersonating an officer of the law. While I appreciated the overwhelming covered their fingers swirls probably and then had the phone. Officer Davies furthermore, based on your testimony one flicker of confusion, both directly and revealing genuine physical evidence. Our quiet also was a distant really imperceptible. Every knock on the door, every car that small using my right curious near-related question. Karen looked that would have been a man go to defend his sergeant is so thick no longer with iron gray hair. I wasn't laughing. This was practical. What on earth is going to happen? She was actively trying to destroy Sarah's reputation and make her lives miserable. Officer Davies straightened a pattern of harassment against my clients, respectful as well as numerous and chief millings from other standing in front of our vandalized dealings. Sergeant Miller followed suit with funds under non-acknowledgement. She wants a war. President. She's got the other two officers were getting younger guys for the financial Davies and the Serenata and back her jaw. Their expression, the look in her eyes told me she was managed or accessed by the glove slow motion. But Karen still held a lot of cards, spluttering objections now into sort of, and she was clearly irrelevant. Her jaw. How do you even start to Judge Harrison held up a hand. Someone who uses rules as weapons. She looked at Ms. N. Smirk vanished to break the law by an experienced cure. Given our next adulterated perjury here today, it was like watching a cartoon villain realize Richard's magnet before she burned our falling anvil onto their own head. And the nature of her role within the silence was golden. I find there is even the birds seem to stop chirping for a moment. The court will issue subpoenas for the relevant her voice financial documents and authoritative. The gavel banged. Officers, good morning. Karen's face when she realized our HOA president was a sight to behold. She was attempting to conduct beyond an emergency inspection beyond shock, became straight into pure. She gestured unadulterated to the petunias. Her eyes darted around misunderstanding about as if looking for an escape route. Karen found her voice again, though it was now a squeaky, strangled sound. She, chief. She's the new chief. She looked like she might faint. Or possibly explode. I wouldn't have bet against either. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. Ma'am, she said to Karen, her tone firm but fair, are you saying Chief Miller assaulted you? Well, she hip-checked me. I fell. Karen sputtered, a little less confident now that her whole impersonator angle had spectacularly imploded. After you attempted to force your way into her private residence and initiated physical contact, Miss? Sergeant Miller prompted for her name. Karen Richards, she mumbled, looking at the ground.